We say the word God as if there had only ever been one God, alone, from the beginning, before the world, before time. It feels less like a belief and more like the plain shape of reality. But open the oldest layers of the Hebrew Bible and read them slowly, and something unexpected begins to show through. The God of Israel has neighbors. He has a council of other divine beings around him. He has a family. He is given the throne of an older God and the storms of another, and he is worshipped in a land crowded with gods who are spoken of as real. Before God was one, there were many. And the strangest part of the story is this: the Bible never fully erased them. It left the seams showing. The fossils are still in the text, if you know where to look. Tonight, we follow those seams back into the world before the one God, not to tear anything down, only to ask the honest question: where did the God of Israel come from? And the answer begins with a name that is hiding in plain sight. Start with the word Israel itself. It is one of the most repeated names in the Bible, and it does not contain the name of Yahweh. It contains the name of a different God, El. In the languages of the ancient Near East, the word El simply meant God, but it was also the personal name of a specific deity. El, the high God of the Canaanite world, the father of the gods, the ancient one, pictured as a wise and bearded king, enthroned at the source of the rivers, presiding over a divine family. And when we read the stories of the earliest ancestors of Israel, the God they meet is again and again called by the names of El: God Almighty, El Shaddai; God Most High, El Elyon; the everlasting God, El Olam. These are not random titles. They are the names and epithets of the Canaanite high God. There's even a moment where the Bible seems to admit the shift out loud. In the book of Exodus, God tells Moses something remarkable. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them. Read that plainly, and it is a statement about history. The ancestors knew God under the old names of El. The name Yahweh came later. The text itself remembers a time before the name we now treat as eternal. And the traces are everywhere once you notice them. The place where Jacob wrestles and meets God is named Bethel, which means the house of El. Personal names carry the same fingerprint. The name Ishmael means El hears. The name Israel itself is usually understood to mean something like El strives or El rules. A people who would one day stake everything on the name of Yahweh had woven the name of an older God into their land, their ancestors, and their very identity. They did not invent their God out of nothing. They inherited him, names and all, from the world around them. To see how crowded that older world was, we go north to a ruined city on the coast of Syria. In the late 1920s, archaeologists at a site called Ras Shamra uncovered the remains of an ancient city named Ugaritic, and in its ruins they found libraries of clay tablets written in a language we now call Ugaritic. These texts are not the Bible. They are the myths of Israel's Canaanite neighbors, written down before the kingdoms of Israel and Judah even existed, and they describe a full divine world. At its head sits El, the kindly old king of the gods. Beside him is the goddess Asherah, his consort, the mother of the gods. Their children fill the heavens. Among them is a young violent storm god named Baal, who rides the clouds and hurls the lightning and battles the sea and death itself. This is the religious landscape into which Israel was born. Not an empty sky with a single god in it. A sky full of a divine family with a high god, a mother goddess, and a council of sons. It is worth dwelling on how that divine world worked, because the Bible borrows its very furniture. El presides over an assembly. The other gods are called his sons, the sons of El, and in some texts they number 70, a great family of divine beings who gather before their Father's throne. Decisions are made in council. Messengers are sent out. It is less like a lone monarch alone in the void, and more like a royal house with a patriarch, a queen, and many children. and those children have stories of their own. The young storm god Baal wages a terrifying war against the sea, against the roaring chaos of the deep, and he wins and is enthroned as king. Later he is swallowed by death itself, and the whole world withers and dries until he returns, and the rains come back with him. These were the great dramas of the Canaanite imagination, and once you know them, you begin to hear their echoes everywhere in the Bible. A God who defeats the sea and the deep, a God who rides upon the clouds, a God enthroned as king after battle. The Bible is speaking the religious language of its neighbors, even as it bends that language toward a single name. And the Bible knows this counsel. It never quite lets it go. Listen to one of the Psalms. It opens with a stunning scene. God takes his stand in the divine assembly. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. The divine assembly, in the midst of the gods. This is not a slip. It is a picture of the heavenly court, exactly like the court of El at Ugaritic, with a high God presiding over other divine beings. In the psalm, those lesser gods are judged and condemned to die like mortals. But to be condemned, they first have to be there. The scene assumes a council of gods as its starting point, and this council is not confined to a single psalm. It runs through the whole library. In the book of Job, the sons of God come to present themselves before the throne. A prophet describes seeing Yahweh seated on his throne with all the host of heaven standing beside him to his right and to his left. Another psalm asks, who among the heavenly beings can compare to Yahweh, a God feared in the great council of the holy ones? Again and again, the God of Israel is not alone up there. He is surrounded by a court of lesser divine beings. What changes slowly across the centuries is the rank of that court. In the oldest layers, they are gods in their own right. Later, they are demoted. They become the host of heaven, then the sons of God, then simply angels, messengers with no will and no power of their own. And the psalm of the divine assembly captures the exact moment of the turn. The gods are put on trial. They are stripped of their immortality. They are sentenced to fall and die like any mortal prince. In a single short poem, we are watching the gods of the old world being demoted out of existence. Now go to one of the oldest poems in the Bible, near the end of Deuteronomy. And here we find one of the clearest fossils of all. The poem describes how the Most High divided up the nations of the world. And it says he fixed their boundaries according to the number of the divine beings, the sons of God. Each nation in this ancient picture is allotted to a god. And then comes the key line. Yahweh's own portion is his people. Jacob is the share allotted to him. Sit with what that means. The Most High distributes the nations among the gods, and Yahweh receives Israel as his allotment. In the oldest form of the text, Yahweh is one of the divine beings who is each given a people under a higher God who does the dividing. Here is where the story sharpens, because we can catch a later hand smoothing it over. That line about the sons of God survives in the oldest witnesses. It is there in the ancient Greek translation, the Septuagint. It is there in a Hebrew copy found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which reads the sons of God. But in the standard medieval Hebrew text, the one most later Bibles were translated from, the words have been changed. Instead of the number of the sons of God, it now reads the number of the sons of Israel. It is a small edit, but it points in an unmistakable direction. The older reading spoke of a council of divine beings. A later scribe, living in a fully monotheistic world, found that uncomfortable and quietly adjusted it into something safer. The same instinct we saw elsewhere, the moving of an idea to fit a newer faith, is at work here too. The seam was being sewn shut, but the older copies preserved the original cloth. So we have El, the high God with his council and his family. And we have Yahweh, who in the oldest poems is given a nation as his portion. What happened between them is one of the great quiet events in the history of religion. They merged. Over time, Yahweh and El were no longer kept apart. Yahweh was identified with El. He took El's titles for his own. He became the Most High, the Almighty, the everlasting. He inherited El's throne and El's counsel and El's role as the kindly sovereign king of heaven. The two faces became one face. But Yahweh did not only absorb the old high God, he also took on the powers of the young storm god. The Bible again and again describes Yahweh in the language once used for Baal. He rides on the clouds. He thunders from the heavens. His voice breaks the cedars and shakes the wilderness. He goes out to war against the sea and the great deep. In the older world, those were the deeds of the storm god. In the Bible, they belong to Yahweh. He has gathered the high God and the storm god into a single towering figure. Why did the merger go so smoothly with El, but turn into a war with Baal? The likely answer is character. El was the high God, the kindly sovereign, the Father on the throne. To fuse Yahweh with El was simply to seat Yahweh at the top of the divine house. There was no rivalry in that, only inheritance. And you can still feel El's gentle, ancient kingship in later visions of God, the white-haired Ancient of Days robed in light, while the heavenly court stands in attendance. Baal was a different matter. Baal was not the throne. Baal was the competition. A popular storm god with his own temples and his own devoted crowds, occupying the very role that Yahweh was now claiming. So Yahweh did not merge with Baal. He took his powers and then made war on his cult. The Bible quietly keeps the storm god's thunder and clouds for Yahweh, while condemning by name everyone who bows to Baal. The powers were kept. The rival was destroyed. But where did Yahweh himself come from before he absorbed all the rest? Here, we must be careful, because the evidence is older and dimmer, and scholars genuinely disagree. So we will say only what the texts say. Some of the most ancient poems in the Bible do not place Yahweh's origin in the land of Israel at all. They place it to the south in the deserts of Edom and a region called Teman, around the mountains of Seir and Sinai. One old song says that Yahweh came from Sinai and dawned upon his people from Seir. Another says that when Yahweh went out from Seir, the earth trembled and the heavens poured down rain. A prophet sings that God came from Teman, from the southern mountains, wrapped in glory and storm. These poems remember Yahweh as a God who marches up from the southern desert, a fierce warrior of storm and fire. Many scholars take this as a memory of his earliest home somewhere in the south, before he was ever the high God of a settled kingdom. There are tantalizing hints from Egyptian records of a desert people in that region connected to a place that may carry his name. But this is a hypothesis, not a proven fact, and honest history has to leave it open. Picture it carefully and tentatively. A fierce god of storm and war, worshipped by tribes scattered through the southern deserts. Somehow, whether carried north by migrating groups or spread by trade and memory, his cult takes root among the peoples who will one day become Israel. And there, in the hill country of Canaan, the desert god meets the established high god, El, already enthroned over his divine family. Rather than destroy that older faith, the newcomer fuses with it. The desert warrior becomes the heavenly king. The details are speculation, and we should hold them loosely. But it would explain a great deal about why the God of Israel carries the marks of a storm god and a high god at the very same time. What is clear is the shape of the journey. A storm and warrior god remembered as coming from the southern wilderness, rises to be merged with the high god of Canaan, and then climbs higher still. So how did this God, one among many, become the only God? Not in a single moment, not by one decree. It took centuries, and it was fought over the entire way. For much of Israel's history, the practice was not monotheism, but something scholars call monolatry, the worship of one God while taking for granted that other gods existed. The first commandment itself has this shape. You shall have no other gods before me. It does not say there are no other gods. It says, put no other God ahead of this one. The rivals are assumed to be real. They are simply forbidden, and the rivals were everywhere. The storm god Baal had followers in Israel for centuries. The prophets rage against his altars. Kings build and tear down his temples. And it was not only Baal. The Bible itself complains in vivid detail about the crowd of gods worshipped right inside Jerusalem. There was Asherah, the old mother goddess, whose sacred pole stood for a time even within the temple of Yahweh. There was the worship of the sun and the moon and the host of heaven, the stars themselves treated as divine. There were households who baked cakes for a goddess they called the Queen of Heaven, and who later insisted that life had been better and bread more plentiful when they still served her. These are not foreign rumors invented by enemies. They are the Bible's own description of what ordinary Israelite religion often looked like on the ground for centuries. The reforms came in waves. A king named Hezekiah is remembered for tearing down the high places. Generations later, a king named Josiah goes further still, cleansing the temple itself, hauling out the vessels made for Baal and Asherah and the host of heaven, and pulling down the shrines across the land. And these reforms quietly tell us something important. You do not need to abolish what was never there. The sheer ferocity of the cleansing is itself the proof of how many gods Israel had been worshiping all along. The decisive turn came with catastrophe. When the kingdom fell and the people were carried into exile in Babylon, their whole world collapsed. By every ancient assumption, a conquered people's God had been defeated. And in that crisis, a few thinkers made a leap more radical than anything before. They declared that Yahweh had not been defeated at all, that he had used Babylon as his own instrument, that he ruled every nation because he was the only God there was. It is in the words of an exile prophet that we finally hear true monotheism spoken without compromise. I am Yahweh, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. The other gods are nothing. They are wood and stone and empty names. That is not where Israel's religion began. That is where it arrived late through struggle and disaster. The one God is not the starting point of the story. He is its hard-won conclusion. The remarkable thing is that the Bible kept the evidence of its own journey. It could have erased the council of the gods. It could have scrubbed out the sons of God and the storm god's thunder and the old names of El. Instead, mostly, it left them in. The seams are still visible. The fossils are still in the rock. A careful reader can still see the high God and his family, the divine assembly, the nations divided among the gods, and a desert storm god climbing his way to the throne of heaven. Monotheism, it turns out, was not a memory of how things had always been. It was a revolution, and the gods it replaced did not simply vanish. They left their fingerprints all over the one God who remained. His titles came from one. His storms came from another. His throne and his council came from a third. And perhaps that is the most human thing in the whole story. The people of Israel did not receive their God ready-made and finished, handed down complete from the sky. They built him across centuries out of the materials they had. The high God and the storm God and the council of heaven, slowly carving away everything that was not him until only one figure remained, vast enough to fill the whole sky alone. The journey from many to one was not a fall from some perfect beginning. It was a climb. And the height they finally reached, one God over all the earth, would go on to remake the world. Which leaves one more question hanging in the dark. If the high God of Canaan had a wife, a great mother goddess at his side, and Israel's God inherited so much else from him, then what became of her? There are inscriptions scratched into desert stone that seem to bless Yahweh and his Asherah. But that is a story for another night.